Welcome to our podcast From Cold to Close. My name is Saeed and I'm the founder here at SRC Growth, a company that works with management consulting and boutique consulting firms from around the world to help them increase their revenue and profitability by acquiring new clients. My guest today is Scott Wilson. Scott is the managing director of Yates, a company that works as a strategic advisor to Fortune 200 leadership teams on the global transformation of operations. They focus on global infrastructure, cybersecurity, strategic outsourcing, and global operating models to support sustainable operations and growth. Scott, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you. It's great to be here. I
Yeah,
appreciate the
no,
invite.
No, it's a pleasure to have you, and really looking forward to the episode today. I guess for our viewers and listeners out there, I like to start off every podcast with asking our guests to give the brief background on your journey to where you are today and the current role you play within the business. So, are you able to give us a little bit of a
Sure, you
insight?
bet. I can give you a bit of a Cliff Notes version of that. Was one of the handful of people that helped start the BPO practice at Price Waterhouse back in the late 90s, early 2000s. We started with our first outsourcing relationship with an insurance company based here out of Dallas, where I'm based out of. And that was back, the application outsourcing and infrastructure outsourcing part of the business had started a few years before, but BPO was relatively new. And we took over the entire accounting department. It was about 250 accounting resources. And we did all the accounting work all the way up to handing the CFO his paperwork to sign for the SEC, which fast forward now, Sarbanes-Oxley, the rules are a bit different, but that's how we started the BPO practice. And then from there, we did deals, $1 billion deal with Nortel, $1 billion deal with BP, deals with Equifax and a bunch of other companies. We ended up growing a global practice. And you fast forward a few years and the dot-com bust and then the accounting scandals and the management consulting firms were trying to get out of the audit firms. And you saw Anderson become Accenture. PwC was looking at the same thing. September 11th happened. That was a key triggering event for us in that the BPO practice at PW, we were looking at being bought by a venture capital group out of investment banking group out of London. And we were going to have our own global operations headquartered out of Stamford, Connecticut. But when that event happened, that came to a halt. About the same time, IBM stepped in to buy PwC Consulting, but they wanted the BPO practice. So I was part of the deal team when IBM bought PwC Consulting and merging into BPO practice, and then stayed there for a few years, and then went to Accenture and was a managing director at Accenture and the Resources Operating Group, and worked with global clients on large scale operational transformations, technology transformations, plant automation work, things of that nature. Still working with clients like BP, Rio Tinto, Holly One, and others. So that's been my journey. I started from the old days of outsourcing when you hired everybody and put a new name on the paycheck, uh, leading transitions to working with the development of offshore delivery centers and having onshore, nearshore, offshore, and then starting to bring in process standardization, and now that's evolving into automation and AI and things of that nature. So that's a bit of my background.
Yeah, wow. Amazing journey and really clearly a great CV there with working with some of the largest organizations in the world, working on big deals and things like that. It's always interesting to hear, and I guess the listeners can really understand the level of entrepreneur and business owner that we're speaking with today. Before I get into, and what I want to really talk about, a lot of what I want to talk about today is productivity in post-pandemic life, but also the elements of business development and how to grow a firm. But I really, before I get into that, I want to ask you a question on what was your why in starting Yates? Why did you go into becoming where you are in the organization?
Well, I was introduced to Charlotte Yates by a friend of mine, Peter Bender Samuel, who was the founder of Everest Group. And she had a healthcare client that was going through a separation from their parent company and needed help in the spin out of that activity and how it impacted IT operations, and then looking at IT operations longer term and what that transformation may look like. And I've always liked more of the entrepreneurial field. I've worked with several companies that are startups as advisory board members and how can they help grow their operations. And I just saw this opportunity as a managing director at Yates to work with large scale clients. Our sweet spot's the Fortune 100, working with the C-suite and really strategic transformation programs. And so I could bring that 25 plus years of experience, having been in delivery and transition and change, and bring all that experience to help our clients. And I enjoy that. I find it fun. I find it interesting. It's never the same day twice. Challenges are similar, but they're always different depending on the company and the organization.
Yeah, I hear that a lot, especially when it's speaking with consultants. It's never the same day twice, right? Because you've got so many different types of organizations. You're working with different clients, different problems going on. So you're a jack of all trades almost in a specific niche. You understand lot of a lot. So it's always interesting to hear that. I wanted to really talk about productivity at the top of the podcast. In the post-pandemic world where remote working is now the norm and become more of the norm than ever before, how important is it to measure productivity, if at all? And is it a challenge for organizations now, especially management consulting firms, strategic consulting firms?
It's incredibly important. I mean, growing up in consulting and even in the outsourcing space, we always tracked productivity because that's how margins and profit are important. And it's a bit of there's an art and a science to it, right? You're in consulting, and I remember Bill Green talking about this, who was former CEO of Accenture, the first CEO of Accenture, and talking about, the secret sauce is our people. Right? We don't sell products. We are built on our reputation and our relationships, and that's true at Yates, and that's true at any consulting firm. And you need to be able to track the quality of the work that people are doing, to be able to identify from a leadership position, are there inefficiencies in our process and what we're doing? Are there ways we can improve and make it more efficient? But also to be able to do resource planning and forecasting. What type of resources do we need based on the growth that we're seeing? And you have to be able to manage that pipeline and attract talent. We do a lot of outcome-based work at Yates. We're not a rate card firm, and I like that because it puts pressure on us to make sure that we are looking at uh, we're pretty confident in what we can deliver for the price that we can deliver it at. And if we can't, that's on us. But it takes some of that risk out for our clients. Newer firms that I've worked with, friends that have started firms. I've got a good friend here in Dallas that has a technology firm I've worked with over the last 7 years. And as they have pivoted into this model of tracking time and trying to estimate projects, it was a bit of getting people comfortable that it's not intended to be a gotcha. It's
Mm,
not intended to be a negative, but it's to better be able to manage the products and get to what's the profitability margin you're trying, what's that target you're trying to hit, and do you have enough resources to do the work? You can't just roll bodies on, and people on in 5 days. It takes time in today's market, especially with the competitive as it is. So you have to have some foresight to the demand that you need to meet for your customers. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about, serving your customers, right? And helping them meet their needs. And if you can't do that timely, they'll go find somebody that will.
yeah. No, I think you raise a really great point there. In terms of then the role of timesheets within consulting firms, what role do timesheets play in managing productivity and accountability within your firm and other consulting firms? Are there any innovative alternatives to traditional timesheet tracking, or is it just timesheets are the most productive way to be able to really measure productivity?
Well, fortunately, there are applications now that will help you with that. I think it all depends on the size and the complexity of the firm.
Hmm.
I remember days when I used to track stuff on a spreadsheet or in a notebook. But now we use a platform that's real simple. You set up all your clients and your projects in it. You assign the resources to it, and I have a template. I just copy that template in every week, and I put my time in across where I work, whether it is business development related or if it's related to a specific engagement with a client. So it doesn't take me a lot of time to do that. Now, I think I've seen companies where they want their employees to do it every day in a consulting firm. I think that's a bit much. I think that's a bit of management overkill from my perspective. I think, just tracking it weekly and looking at how are we doing monthly, I think works well, and it keeps it forefront. If you're not, and for me, with as busy as I am, if I'm not doing that and looking at it every week, and I think, oh, I'm going to do it monthly, I'm going to forget what I did last week, much less 4 weeks ago, and get it right. So I think it helps, the firm be more accurate, whatever consulting business is, even if it's a software development consulting kind of shop, that you're tracking that time appropriately. So I don't see it as a burden. I think for companies that I've worked with where that was something new they were implementing, it was just getting the employees over the hump that may have never done it. That this isn't we're not policing you. That's not the intent of it. That you have to explain why you're doing it and show them the importance of it and how it can help make the company better and it can help lead to growth.
I think that's a really great point that you made there. And one of the things you said at the top of your response was it depends on the size and complexity of the organization, right? If you're a 300, 500,000 person employee company, there has to be a level of measuring something. You can't just go off of a whim, and you might not be a granular way of doing it and going, okay, 3 minute increments and
Yeah,
5 minute increments and
yeah,
that type of thing. Which we know there's some organizations out there that are very granular with it, and it can make people feel like the admin side of work is more of a burden than others. But in terms of actual for the organization, if you're able to see where the time allocation is, because it's a great point in the sense that consulting, the resource is the human capital, right? That is the skill that is being provided. And so when you're not measuring the widget, you're measuring the resource allocation, right? And so then it becomes a case of how that is, and that's why it's so important. So I think you've mentioned some great points there.
well, and too with your talent when you're looking at resource planning, right? You've got what is the capacity? What availability do they have? Can they take on an additional project or help out a portion of their time on another team? That's important to be able to leverage that talent appropriately so you can deliver for your clients.
Yeah.
I'm a big proponent of servant leadership and that you're here to help make a better outcome for your customer. And like the way you put it, right? That people aren't widgets. It's human capital, and they're people that have aspirations, goals, and dreams, and they want to succeed in their careers, and you want to help them do that. And for me, I've always thought about it as at the end of the day, we're all business owners. Even if you're just starting out at level one consulting, start thinking of it as your business. If you were the customer, what would you want to pay for? Manage the time and expenses appropriately. And then that's how you learn and grow in your career is treating it that way.
Yeah, exactly. Those who manage to grow in their career look at it themselves as their own island, I guess, and an island where they help bring in additional business to the organization, as well as having a level of autonomy. And moving into that point, I guess my next question would be, how do you balance the need for detailed tracking with fostering a culture of trust, autonomy amongst your team? Because that's difficult one, isn't it? Is that, oh, are we managing, or is it, that type of thing?
Yeah, I've always, in my career, I've never gone less than 15-minute increments in most of the projects I work on. They're larger, longer term projects. So you're talking hours in a day, not 15-minute increments, like what you might see from a law firm. But I think it's finding that right balance on the project you're working on and what's that level of detail. But I also think it's approaching your team and the employees that work with you that you trust them, right? You trust them to do the right thing. I come in and assume the best out of people until they prove me wrong, right? There's no reason for me to play the police on them. I trust people are going to do the right thing and track their time accordingly. If people don't, you eventually find that out. It gets discovered, right? Projects aren't getting delivered on time. Were they really doing what they say they were doing? I have found that to be few and far between with the teams that I've worked with. That's never really been a challenge. Um, the challenge comes in is if we misestimated something and it's taking us more effort to get done than we thought, then that's an opportunity for what did we miss and what can we do better next time. right? And it's an opportunity for growth and change. So I think it's always about how do you address those challenges and how do you see them? And I tend to see them all as it's opportunities for lessons learned, right? And if we come in and did great, deliver great, okay, what can we learn from that to make sure we do that again next time? And how we estimated it and scoped out the project. If we missed it, what can we learn and do better next time to avoid doing that? And we all grow from that.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really great point. And following on from that, I guess you mentioned at the top of use the word, I should say, and I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into it. And that's AI, right? And how AI is now coming into our lives, whether it's on a daily basis, on an individual basis with ChatGPT, or on an organizational basis with different softwares now implementing AI elements to it. How has the rise of AI and automation impacted your approach to consulting services, particularly in terms of productivity and business development?
It certainly has an impact. I mean, you mentioned things like ChatGPT. There are tools like that that you can use, whether it's that or Copilot, that certainly can make your job. Whether you're in a leadership role like me, or you're a project manager or program manager on a project or a consultant, that can exponentially increase the rate that you can get work completed. I just think about simple task. You have a 1 2 hour conference call, a big meeting, and you need to recap that meeting, an executive summary, and action item follow-up points. You can use AI to do that now, where before you had somebody scribbing the notes out and trying to get the notes together, and everybody trying to remember what was talked about. Did anything get missed? Comparing everybody's handwritten notes. But then you had the recording of it. Now you got the transcripts. Now you can have AI summarize that transcript, right? It's much more efficient. But you now also have the whole concept of agentic AI coming along. And, I foresee in the not too distant future, not 5 or 7 years out, but within a couple of years at the most, where whatever role you're in, you have some sort of agent or agents that are replicating your ability to do more as one person. So I can do it across two or three things versus focused on one. And it'll be interesting to see what that looks like and how that plays out, but it is coming and it's coming fast. I have a good friend of mine that just took on the chief AI officer role for a company that is heavily focused on agentic AI. And the things that they're looking at doing are tremendous. I mean, it will change everybody's how they work in whatever role you're in. And that can be frightening, if you're not comfortable with it, because change always is. But if you approach it in a way of how can I, it used to be the old adage, there's only 24 hours in a day and one guy can only do so much. Well, now if there's three of you in a 24-hour day, what can you do, right? That's the potential, and how do you leverage that for growth?
Yeah, 100%. As business owners, I think that's such it's a really poignant point that you mentioned there, in the sense that a lot of the difficulties, especially in my own business, I'm sure with many of the leaders that I've spoken with, a lot of the difficult areas of business isn't necessarily what the inputs are, but it's the human side, right? And it's about the transfer of knowledge, and it's about how you're able to manage your team and things like that. With agentic AI and that side of things, what you're able to do with a little bit of training is, I guess, transfer the knowledge to someone that, or something that makes less mistakes. Less mistakes means more streamlined operations, which means higher margins, which means lower costs, which means more profitable business. And so, as business owners, we really need to be open-minded to what's coming. And if you're not open-minded to what's coming, then things can change very quickly. We've seen overnight how
Yeah.
ChatGPT changed the landscape of what we thought was possible. People are using ChatGPT, Perplexity AI instead of Google nowadays to get their answers. So on an individual level, it's having a massive impact. So I think that's really important. In terms of then what you're seeing in the market with AI, with agentic and things like that, how do you see it impacting your own business specifically in helping you?
It's a really good question. I think it's going to be in terms of things, at least what I see right now in things like project management. How can you leverage AI to more effectively manage programs, both the communication side, tracking of tasks, things of that nature that can become more automated. There's certainly tools out there and platforms out there that have made project management and setting up programs a lot easier than it used to be. But I think there's going to be more things that just become automated in that process that even simplify that from people having to set up and enter the templates and get started. So I think that'll be interesting. I think I think, everybody's trying to figure out what does AI mean for them? What does it mean for their operations? I think it is, I'm not going to say that there's a silver bullet or a magic wand that gives you the answer and this is the nirvana of AI. I think it is, at least from what I see in my perspective, I think it's finding the targeted problem where you can apply AI to help improve whatever that scenario is. So they're targeted solutions. I was talking about a friend of mine about that's the CIO of this CAIO of I'm gonna get that right here in a minute. Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer. Yeah, CAI at this agentic business. And he was talking about, if he had to go speak in London, he could have his agent, in dialogue, not typing, in dialogue. Say, go look at my calendar. I need to be in London on this date. I'm speaking. Here's the agenda. Plan my trip. Next thing he knows, he's got his agenda trip. Here are your airline options. Do you want me to book it? And yes, go ahead and book that. And it's calling and making the reservations. And he said, even to the point and go, oh, you're free for dinner this night. Here's some dinner options in London, and it's calling and making the dinner reservations, right? He's not having to go out and search and figure all that out. He's just telling the agent. The agent's going and doing it on his behalf. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of one micro, example of how life can change. I think it'll get to the point it's not just going to be for work, but it's going to be in our daily lives. How we manage our households, pay our bills, and things of that nature that just get even more automated. So I think it's going to be interesting. There's a good book that I just started reading. A friend turned me on to. It's called, in fact, I have it sitting on my desk. Autonomous Transformation by Brian Evergreen. The cover of it talks about creating a more human future in the era of artificial intelligence. And I think that's the trick, right? How do you create a more, human future and bringing and recognizing that it can be a benefit to the workforce, to your human capital, to humanity, if you use it in a positive way, right? Artificial intelligence is not a positive or negative. It's what do we choose to do with it?
Absolutely.
And so I think that's from a leadership perspective, how do we leverage it for the benefit of those around us
For sure.
to make life better?
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree with you more in that sentiment. Primarily because there are people out there that are murmuring, oh, AI is going to take away your jobs and these types of things. But with a higher level skill level job role like consulting and things like that, expertise is what people are buying.
Right.
Of course, you want to make the team's life easier and more efficient, but at the same time, that expertise does come from people knowing where to access information, having knowledge and experience in the specific sector as well. But that doesn't mean that AI is there to take away their jobs. It's there to enhance their ability to do their jobs. And then
Right.
the lower skilled jobs might be something like, for example,
Well, then how do you upskill and retrain? But the other is, you make a very good point about people buying the expertise. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's a managing partner at a large law firm here in Dallas. They're leveraging AI for legal research. What used to take associates, paralegals hours to do, they can do quickly with AI. But the challenge with that is how do you train the next generation to have the expertise that, you know, we developed over decades? You know, how do you close that gap? And that's going to be a challenge. How do you solve that? Those are things that have to be considered as we go forward,
I
right?
think
Because I don't come out of business school with all the knowledge that I have today. I know my friend didn't come out of law school with all the knowledge and experience he has today. It was a starting point.
Yeah, 100%. It's that thing where whenever you break through a barrier, right, and the next level or whatever the barrier is, there's always you've overcome some kind of challenge, and there's by doing that, it's created a whole new level of challenges, different challenges out there. Just like how you mentioned, things that you might not have thought about before are now challenges that you have to now overcome to get to that
Well,
level.
Yeah, you think about even in the BPO space, we took over accounting operations and then we started looking at how do you standardize and optimize accounting operations and process improve, right? So if you think about that's kind of taking, people are taking Lean Six Sigma and activity-based costing, all sorts of things, process things, right? That's an industrial age way of thinking. How do I improve a linear operation, if you will? And then the new age that's coming with AI or agentic AI, wherever that goes and whatever the next terminology is, where that goes, it's not an industrial age way of thinking anymore. So how do you pivot your thinking that you've done for decades to, I need to completely reframe how do I solve problems and how do I look at it? And
100%.
we all have to go through that.
For sure. You can't shy away from it, especially as a business owner, but everyone in society will have to deal with it face on, I think, sooner rather than later and sooner than what most people actually
I
feel like.
saw an article the other day, and I don't remember the company, but it was the CFO of a fairly large startup. I think it had several $100 million in revenue. But his entire finance FP&A organization, finance planning and accounting, was all virtual, all done through AI. He had a very lean accounting department of senior people with expertise, but all the other stuff that would typically go with that was all being done by AI. That's the power of it. He's certainly an early adopter of leveraging it.
Yeah,
But what
yeah,
does that mean?
yeah.
What do you do with that?
It's
That
it's
it's a big change coming.
Yeah, real big change, real big change. In terms of then the bandwidth within your organization and even your own time, and you mentioned there how that leader was able to streamline their accounting services through these automations and AI so that they can have actual expertise looking at things. In in your area of the field, how do you manage bandwidth constraints when dealing with multiple high priority projects simultaneously? I know that's a question that's the hardest question out there, but
Yeah.
are you using anything in particular to try and help you to manage that?
Not to manage it. I have used things like AI to help me be more productive in some of the things that I'm trying to solve. But that managing expectations and priorities when there's multiple high priority things competing for time, that's still, that still comes into the human relationship at the end of the day. Am I like you can't solve everything with AI. At the end of the day, it's having the emotional intelligence to be able to navigate those situations and work with clients to balance those priorities, and do it in a way that's effective so nobody feels like they're getting slighted, but they're being heard and the problems are getting addressed. And then some of that too is it a capacity issue, right? Is it just a surge in the moment, or is this long term and I need to find a more sustainable solution? And that just comes with experience and whatever that scenario and situation is to know, okay, we need to bring somebody else on board to help out because the load's now more than one person. And that's where that experience and expertise comes in.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, and especially in leadership role within your organization, I think you can buy the IQ, you can hire the IQ, you can implement AI or AI automations to with IQ to help you with the intellectual side of things. But EQ is one of the biggest
Hmm.
things that I feel like won't change because we'll always be human. We still interact face to face and feel a certain way. We pick up on body language, we pick up on facial cues and things like that. And that side of things, the relationship side of things, almost becomes, in my opinion, more important now with everything that's coming in. Especially as business owners ourselves, it means that the relationship is more important than ever before.
Yes. Well, and that came out of the pandemic too, right? I was fortunate at Accenture. We started implementing Cisco's telepresence capability in all of our offices. So we were doing virtual meetings and embracing that early on, well, long before the pandemic. That was a big investment by the firm to do that. And, we had our high def cameras as managing directors that we could use so we could be anywhere and still have that similar experience. Today, everybody's using Teams, or Google's version of that or Zoom or whatever the platform is. And the pandemic kind of forced that change. But even the trick with that, to your point about it being human and that relationship, I think it takes more intentionality to develop relationships with the clients virtually versus getting on a plane on Monday and coming home on Thursday and being in their office where you're going to lunch, you see them in the hallway, you're grabbing coffee. You have to now figure out, how do I do that in this environment? And that for me has been being efficient with meeting times if they're one-on-one so that I have time in there to have the personal dialogue, or setting that time up, or just reaching out going, hey, you got a few minutes to catch up, right? And catching up virtually. Call it a virtual coffee, if you will, but it's not to really have an agenda, but just to talk. How are you doing? How's family doing? Everything going okay? Anything I can help you with?
Yeah.
Hey, did you see the game this weekend?
Yeah.
And making that human connection. And I think it's real easy in today's environment to let our calendars get completely booked up for a full day of back-to-back meetings, trying to cram in moments to get work done in the midst of all that. And we're multitasking all day versus standing back going, wait, it's my calendar. I need to manage it. And I need to be intentional about some of the key relationships that I need to foster.
Yeah. For,
Um,
for
and that's
sure.
just being human.
Yeah. And that's really a really great point, and something that we actually preach to a lot of our clients as well. It's that the post-pandemic world is a different world to what we had before, and so you have to be intentional with things like business development, things like relationship building, things like how you're going to be able to bring in business in an environment where it's harder to see someone in person. It's easier and people are more accustomed to jumping on a Zoom call. But some people might feel that, oh, well, I can't build a relationship on a Zoom call. I can't do this on Microsoft Teams. I can't do this on. But that's you being someone that is not now moving with the times, because getting 1 hour with a client or 1 hour with a prospect is harder now than ever because they're more comfortable. Let's jump on a call instead. I don't have to leave my office. I don't have to leave my home. I can have a conversation, get the information I need from you, and then I can go back to the work that I need to be doing. Otherwise, my business will go. And so it's about finding, and I love your terminology there, is being intentional with your calendar and actually finding the time to actually make an effort with all these other elements. And it's not just business development, it's your own employees, it's your own team,
Hmm.
it's your own
Yeah.
family sometimes, like
Yeah.
FaceTime, for example,
Right.
that came in before Zoom, right? But if you're long distance, it's like, oh, I could give you a call, or we could just see each other on FaceTime. And that's now evolved into the business environment. And that actually leads me on to my next segment. And this segment we like to call the Entrepreneur's Room in the podcast. And this is a series of questions we ask consistently to all of our guests. And so the first question I really wanted to ask you was, how are you currently spending your days as the leader of your business?
That's a good question. So, I've always been in roles, and I've always, from a consulting perspective, have been a proponent of this, but I have a client that I'm primarily responsible for. And so, I have oversight of all the engagements we do for that client, but I also have deliverables that I'm accountable for in that role as a leader with that client as part of the team there. So I have my own billable target. And I think, from a consulting perspective, there's two things that are important. One is, what is your billable, your chargeability? What's your utilization? And for me, they're two different metrics. If I'm chargeable billable, that's what's that target need to be annually. The other part is, what are the things I'm doing that are value added to the business, which is helping train other team members, or helping on their engagements in their business development, or working on potential, new opportunities with new clients. And so that's how I divide my time. And I have my goal for the year. And so I kind of try to look at my weekly calendar. Am I doing things that are going to align to that goal? So when I get to the end of the year, I can say, okay, I met both those targets, which is why time tracking is important, because I can look at it and go, hey, I'm on track, or I'm off track, or I'm way over. Typically, I'm way over on both, by nature of just me. I've never done an 8-hour day.
Yeah.
But it's being intentional to make sure I'm focusing on all those things. Can I help other members of our firm in the pursuits they're doing to try to win deals? Can I bring my experience to help them? And that's an important part of being a part of a team. So it's looking at all that. It could be collateral development. We've got some new capabilities that we're looking at. How do we package that to market it, right? So I'm working on that side of collateral development and marketing. And what does that need to be? We also do a couple of conferences a year, and I help with the gentleman that coordinates that on, looking at topics and agendas and speakers, and I participated on some panels in that. And those are the other things that I do on top of just day-to-day oversight delivery of client engagement. But that's part of being in that leadership role.
Yeah, 100%. And I always like asking that question because it's always interesting to hear what leaders have on their day-to-day list. And it's never as simple as, oh yeah, I just do client work, I just do. There's always a million and one things that they rattle off that needs to be done in a leadership role. You touched on a couple of points for this next question, but I wanted to ask you to unpack a little bit more. What metrics matter the most to your business?
Are we hitting our target margins? Chargeability, so are you hitting your chargeability target? Those are two primary ones. And then the other thing you look at any business, right? Cash is king. Are we staying current? One, on billing. Are we billing on time? Because we bill, largely based on a lot of our projects are outcome based. So whatever those delivery milestones are that we planned on hitting at certain dates, are we hitting them? And are we billing? And then is the client paying on time? That's really it.
Yeah.
Are you billing on time or are you collecting on time? Is everybody at their chargeability target? If not,
Yeah.
why not?
I love it, love it. Simplifies the whole process, doesn't it? Keep it simple. Simple sells, isn't it? That's the phrase. And in terms of then, how are you currently? And you've touched on there your with business development and what you do outside of your normal daily work and things like that. But how are you currently growing your business? What is it that you're doing? And I know you mentioned some conferences and some marketing activities and things like that, but what business development activities are you doing to drive growth within the organization?
We're we're pretty fortunate in our business in that a lot of our growth, because we don't do a lot of marketing. We
Yeah.
do two events a year, and we don't even sell at those events. It's really bringing C-suite leaders together in kind of Chatham House rules. They can come in and talk about challenges and issues they're facing, and we bring industry expertise in on cutting edge topics, which could be like AI. And so it's a safe place for them to talk and know that nothing's going to get recorded or get, broadcast out. But in that, we'll invite potential new clients into that. And then they kind of get a feel for our expertise and kind of the caliber that we bring to the table. And it kind of sells itself, if you will, without us having to sell. But the other is that we're fortunate is that we have a lot of long-standing relationships because we are not a name like an Accenture or a Cap or a Deloitte or McKinsey. We're a small firm. Our reputation's all we have, and it's what do we deliver now? And so we are laser focused on ensuring we deliver the outcomes for those clients. And because we've done that, wherever those C-suite leaders go, they tend to pick the phone up and go, "Hey, I need you. I could use your help." And they're also willing to go to their network and go, if they hear somebody they know is having a challenge, going, "Hey, you need to call the folks at Yates. They can come in and help you out." And so it's word of mouth is how we grow. And then we get in, and it's like any consulting. Whatever that point solution is, that point problem they're trying to solve, go in and do that really well to earn the right to open the door to what's next. Man, you help me out here. I got a problem over here. Can you come help me? Yeah, we can help you do that too, right? So it just grows from one thing to another. That's typically how we grow, and
Yeah.
we do pretty good at it.
Without a doubt. It's a formula for success that's happened in many consulting businesses. Where does most of your business come from? And you mentioned there word of mouth. Is that word of mouth referrals, that kind of thing?
Word of mouth and referrals and former clients, CIOs at one organization for a handful of years and then leaves and goes to another one. They eventually get in and then pick the phone up and go, "Okay, I need your help again."
Yeah.
And they give us a call, and next thing you know, we've got a new client. And then we're in networking and meeting new CISOs and new executives and leaders in that. And, those leaders grow in their careers and go on to other places. And more times than not, they end up picking up the phone and giving us a call. And we're fortunate in that respect. But that's primarily how we do it. We ensure quality delivery.
Yeah.
We
And
deliver the outcomes we promise.
And that's the power of actually delivering on your outcomes, right? And not on the project scope, because when you can prove that you've done it and you've had a successful outcome for someone, that sells itself, right? They've
Yeah.
got what they've paid for.
Yeah. And our model is not to come in and land and expand. There's certainly, there's part of that in consulting that there's nothing wrong with that, but we're not in going, oh, how do we go from 5 bodies to 100 bodies and everybody's 90% chargeable? That's just not our model. Um, we are focused on strategic initiatives and the outcomes and driving those strategic changes, partnering with the C-suites that we work with. That's our sweet spot. And looking at pragmatic solutions to deliver those programs.
Sure, for sure. And in terms of then Yates as an organization, where do you see the business over the next 3 to 5 years in terms of what you're looking to achieve? How do you see yourself in 3 to 5 years?
I just continued growth, the same thing we've been doing. And I mean, like any business, right? We want to grow and grow our revenue. Um, then and with that, it means you end up growing resources and talent, right? You need more people to do that. But we also want to do that in a way that is, we don't get out over our skis where we can't deliver. Because, like I said, it's our reputation is what we have. That we do that in a managed way, and we take on projects and clients that interest us and that we like. Um, you know, we also are pretty intentional about that. We don't just take on work just to take on work. We're intentional about how we want to grow, where we want to work, and where we want to add value.
Absolutely, absolutely. And at the top of the podcast, you talked about your background and all the experiences you've had over the many years, and you've worked through a number of different times and challenges that went through the years. What have you tried before, and what didn't work? What are your biggest lessons that you've learned over those years?
Man, I think the biggest lesson that I have learned is it's transparency and integrity. I have seen challenges in delivery and operations that I knew a client would not like to hear, but the right thing to do was to have that conversation and have the tough conversation. I have always found that always ends up working out for you in the end versus trying to, where I've seen competitors knowing they had a similar challenge going on at that client, that chose not to say anything, that ended up costing them in the long run hundreds of millions in revenue because they weren't upfront and honest about the problem. Uh, so I think, for me personally, my personal integrity is important. And I think it's being willing to have the tough conversation. And that tough conversation can go both ways, right? It can be, what's our part in it? But hey, you've got some challenges inside your operations. I think you need to be aware of it. Let's have that conversation and not being afraid of it. But it's approaching it in a way, right, with the EQ. You can do that in a way that's not poking somebody in the eye or blaming or shaming or, whatever you want to call it. But just have an adult conversation, be pragmatic about it, and putting the cards on the table. And when you do that, coming to that conversation with, and by the way, here's what we're doing about it, not just here's a problem, and then
Yeah,
sitting there,
yeah.
come to the table with a solution. There's some options, and work through it together. Right? That's part of being a partner, being a strategic partner, and that to me is more important than just being a vendor, being a
Yeah.
supplier.
I absolutely love that, and I think you're spot on there. It's not just expressing or detailing to someone what the problems are. It's okay. Here's the problem. What are the solutions? Well, there's a number of solutions here that we can go down, and into the details and the roots of each of the solutions to find the best solution for them. It's not the best solution for everyone. It's for them, and creating a bespoke kind of response. So I think that's a great point, and that works in leadership roles for internally and external
Yeah,
purposes, right?
yeah.
I wanted to end today's podcast and we end it up with the same question with every single guest. It is, if you had a magic wand to solve one business problem, what would that be?
Probably to make the business development side much easier and faster. It takes time working with organizations to develop the opportunities and then ultimately, depending on the size and scale of them, to then get them to closure. I would love to be able to make that a faster process, but The flip side of that is that churn sometimes that goes into what I call the sausage making actually gets you a better outcome too. So you might forego that.
Yeah.
So
But,
that's
yeah.
yeah,
I know what you mean. I know what you mean. It's one of the biggest banes of most people's journeys in business. That business development side is the time to arrive at a deal can often be quite. It can be 18 days or 18 months, and it's quite
yeah,
frustrating either way.
yep. Either way,
Scott, it's been a pleasure and a great conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your
thank
insights
you.
and your time today. Really enjoyed it today.
I have too, Sad. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Enjoyed the conversation.
No worries at all, Scott. Thank you.
Thank you.